What does it truly mean, to live wisely, especially in a world that, well, it constantly throws challenges at us, at our emotional balance, our relationships, even our deepest sense of who we are? How do we find that sweet spot, between staying true to ourselves and still managing to navigate everything effectively, especially when life just seems to pull us in so many different directions at once? Today, we're doing a fascinating deep dive. We're looking at a collection of insights, all from June 29th, drawn from a source called A Calendar of Wisdom, and also this really powerful essay, The Architecture of Wisdom, integrating ancient philosophy with modern practice. And this isn't just like a random list of quotes. It's carefully put together. When you look at it all, it kind of reveals this blueprint for flourishing. We've got quite the mix here. Everything from, the timeless Stoic philosophy of Epictetus to the incredibly practical observations of someone like Benjamin Franklin.
Right, the polymath.
Exactly. And then there's the really deep spiritual stuff from Leo Tolstoy, and even the, well, sometimes provocative social strategies from Robert Greene.
Definitely provocative.
And it's all woven together with these practical maxims, sayings that have just lasted for ages. There are some surprising connections there too. So our mission today really is to pull out the most important bits of wisdom from all these different sources.
Yeah, connect the dots.
Connect the dots, exactly. See how these seemingly separate ideas actually form a powerful, coherent framework, what we're calling an architecture of wisdom.
I like that term, architecture.
Yeah, it fits, right. A framework for handling life's complexities, keeping your inner integrity, and, actually achieving genuine flourishing. Think of this deep dive as maybe your shortcut to being really well informed, not just about what wisdom is, but how you can actively cultivate it in your own life.
Practical application.
Right. How to maintain that authentic agency, even when you've got all these external pressures and, frankly, internal turbulence, too. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's see how these timeless insights build a structured approach to a life that's both resilient and truly meaningful.
We're going to start right at the foundation, the base of this wisdom architecture. And it begins with a really sharp observation from Benjamin Franklin.
Yeah.
He famously said, "Whatever begins in anger ends in shame."
Powerful.
Isn't it? How many of us have felt that?
Yeah.
That stinging truth in our own lives, that moment of heat, that word snapped out.
Oh, yeah. Or an email sent too quickly.
Exactly. An impulsive action born out of rage, and then it just leads to this cascade of regret or embarrassment, or sometimes even, real damage. And Franklin, this guy was known for his diplomacy, right?
Yeah.
His incredibly sharp observation of people. He must have seen this play out constantly.
Absolutely. He understood that anger is just.
Yeah.
It's a blinding force by its very nature.
It narrows your focus, doesn't it? Your heart races. It bypasses the rational brain. That deliberative part just goes offline for a bit.
Right. And it pushes you towards these immediate, often really destructive reactions.
Think about it in his context, a diplomat losing his temper. All that careful work.
Gone in an instant. Leading to humiliation, maybe.
Or even just in everyday life, a parent reacting with fury to something small a child does, the regret afterwards.
Oh, the guilt, the feeling you've left a scar.
Exactly. When you act from anger, you're just not thinking clearly. You're reacting. Pure reaction.
And those reactions, because they lack foresight or empathy, they lead straight to those outcomes we wish we could take back.
It's such a practical, undeniable truth. It really highlights the immediate, sometimes devastating impact of unchecked emotion. It feels like the right place to start building anything else.
Yeah, it really does. It's foundational.
Absolutely foundational. And if you connect that to the whole idea of wisdom, Franklin clearly saw that emotional regulation isn't just, a nice-to-have personality trait.
Yeah.
It's the fundamental skill. Everything else rests on it.
Like trying to build a house on sand.
Exactly. Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how beautiful the design is or how strong the materials are. If the base isn't stable, the whole thing is compromised.
Makes sense.
And it's the same with us. If our emotional foundation is shaky, if we're always getting swept away by intense feelings,
then your decision-making is shot.
Your long-term planning, your relationships, it all suffers. Unchecked emotions, especially something as strong as anger, they just derail everything. Sabotage your best intentions.
Create internal chaos.
That's a good way to put it. Internal chaos that just stops clear thinking in its tracks.
Okay, so controlling impulses is key. But it's not just about negative stuff like anger, is it? The sources suggest it extends to seemingly positive things too.
That's right.
Which is where Epictetus comes in, the Stoic philosopher. He draws this really powerful parallel. He says, It is the nature of the wise to resist pleasures, but the foolish to be a slave to them.
Another strong one.
It is, and it's fascinating because, at first glance, resisting pleasure and avoiding anger, they feel like opposites, don't they?
They do seem like different ends of the spectrum.
Anger is destructive, negative. Pleasure feels good, desirable, right? So how does Epictetus link them? How are they both part of this same foundational layer of wisdom?
Well, this really gets to the heart of the Stoic view on emotional control. For Epictetus and the Stoics generally, both anger and the pursuit of immediate, unchecked pleasure are impulses.
Okay, just impulses.
Right. And both types of impulses can pull us away from rational thought, from our long-term flourishing. The critical point isn't that pleasure itself is inherently bad, it's the enslavement to it. That's the danger.
Enslavement.
Think about the different kinds of pleasures. The Stoics talked about this. There are natural and necessary ones, eating when you're hungry, resting when you're tired. Those are fine, obviously.
Sure, basic needs.
But then you have the natural but unnecessary pleasures.
Ugh.
Indulging in rich food constantly, mindlessly scrolling social media for hours.
Binge watching shows instead of, connecting with family.
Exactly. Or always seeking immediate comfort, avoiding any moment of quiet or, dare I say, boredom. These things aren't bad in moderation, but wisdom for the Stoic means being able to step back from all these immediate pulls.
Whether it's the urge to lash out in anger,
or the seductive call of instant gratification. It's about making decisions based on broader principles, on reason, on what truly serves your long-term well-being.
So it's about mastery over any impulse that distracts you.
Precisely. Think about modern life. Endless scrolling, constant notifications, the urge for immediate comfort or distraction. If these things control your time, your attention, stop you from doing more meaningful things.
They're just as bad as anger, in a way.
In terms of hindering your flourishing, yes. The wise person isn't emotionless. They aren't incapable of enjoyment. They just aren't controlled by these things.
They choose their response. They choose. They create that pause, that space between the stimulus and the response. That's the core of inner freedom for the Stoics. And it's absolutely crucial for that self-mastery we're talking about. That makes a lot more sense. That capacity to pause, to choose. It really resonates with Leo Tolstoy's insight on handling low moods, too.
Ah, yes, the drunk analogy.
Exactly. His advice for when you're feeling depressed or really irritated is literally treat yourself as though you were drunk. Take no steps and actions until this state has disappeared.
It's such a striking image.
It really is. We all kind of know what being physically drunk means. Senses dulled, judgment gone, actions you regret later. But what does it mean to be drunk on despair or intense irritation?
Well, Tolstoy's genius here is capturing how these altered emotional states fundamentally compromise our perception and judgment.
Just like alcohol does.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Intense emotions, deep sadness, gnawing irritation, overwhelming anxiety, even that blinding rage we talked about, they create a kind of temporary insanity almost.
Yeah, that feels right.
Our thinking gets distorted. Our perception skews heavily negative. Everything looks dark, gloomy, and baleful, as he puts it. Our ability to make rational decisions just plummets.
You misinterpret things easily, say things you don't mean.
Make impulsive choices that are completely out of line with your actual values or goals.
So it connects right back to Franklin's warning about anger again.
Directly. Intense rage, deep despair, they both break your internal compass. You become an unreliable narrator of your own experience.
So the wisdom isn't necessarily to fight the feeling.
Not immediately, no. The crucial practical advice is to refrain. Refrain from major decisions, critical conversations, irreversible actions when you're in that state.
Don't trust your judgment when you're emotionally intoxicated.
Exactly. You wouldn't get behind the wheel drunk, right? Don't make life-altering decisions when you're emotionally drunk. Recognize the state and patiently wait for it to pass.
And Tolstoy even adds that layer of acceptance, doesn't he? Saying that suffering and depression are just part of life.
Part of our life in this world, and we should patiently wait until they are over, or our life is over. It's this deep acceptance of these transient states.
Not something to be immediately battled or acted upon.
Right. It's a blend of self-compassion and really disciplined inaction. Knowing when not to act is a huge part of wisdom.
Disciplined inaction. I like that. It leads us right into Tolstoy's second reflection, which is, well, maybe even more challenging.
The one about happiness and guilt.
Yes. A man should always feel happy. If he is unhappy, it means he is guilty. "Oh Lord, help me to be always happy and to rejoice following and fulfilling your will."
Yeah, that one definitely raises eyebrows.
It does. At first glance, it sounds incredibly harsh. Suggesting unhappiness means you're guilty. It feels like blaming people, especially those genuinely struggling with, say, clinical depression or major life trauma.
It really does sound like that on the surface.
So what kind of guilt is he talking about here? How do we understand it without it just sounding, accusatory?
It's absolutely crucial to see this through the lens of Tolstoy's specific spiritual psychology. It's very different from our modern psychological framework.
Okay.
He's not talking about guilt like you committed a crime or blaming someone for having a legitimate mental health condition. Not at all. It's more about this profound sense of personal responsibility for our inner state, but specifically in the context of our spiritual alignment.
Alignment with what?
For Tolstoy, rooted in his later Christian beliefs, it was about alignment with a greater purpose, with divine will, or simply with what's fundamentally good and natural for the human soul. So, from his perspective, persistent unhappiness might signal a misalignment.
A misalignment? Like how?
Well, maybe you're chasing wealth, but neglecting relationships. Maybe you're seeking power in a way that violates your conscience. Maybe you're living a life completely disconnected from service or community.
So the unhappiness isn't the fault, it's a signal.
Exactly. The guilt is less about moral failure and more about an internal alarm bell. It's signaling that your inner life or your outer actions are out of harmony with your deepest self, or maybe with a higher spiritual calling.
So it's a call for introspection, reevaluating priorities.
Precisely. Are my choices actually supporting my well-being? Am I aligned with something true and meaningful? And notice the second part of the quote, the prayer, "Oh Lord, help me."
Right, he's asking for help.
Yeah. It underscores that while we have responsibility, we're not expected to achieve this constant state of joy purely through sheer willpower. We can seek assistance in aligning ourselves.
So it's an invitation to cultivate joy through purpose and virtue, recognizing unhappiness sometimes as that internal alarm, not external blame.
That's a much more nuanced and frankly useful way to understand it. It's about accountability and seeking that deeper alignment.
Okay, that interpretation makes a huge difference. Now, to kind of round out this foundational section on our inner world, there's this Spanish proverb included in the sources. Para saber no basta leer, hay que caminar y hay que ver. To know, it is not enough to read. One must walk and see.
Beautiful.
It is beautiful. But how does this simple idea about knowledge connect back to all the heavy lifting of emotional regulation and spiritual alignment we've just been discussing? It feels like a slightly different angle.
Actually, I think it connects perfectly. It reinforces this core theme of experiential knowledge being crucial for true wisdom. And that applies directly to emotional regulation.
How so?
It highlights that understanding and mastering your emotions isn't just an intellectual game. You can't just read about Stoicism or Tolstoy's drunkenness analogy or Franklin on anger and suddenly be wise.
You have to actually do it.
Apply it.
You have to walk and see within yourself and in your interactions with the world. You have to observe your own reactions as they happen. Recognize the triggers. Feel the anger or sadness starting.
And then consciously choose to step back or wait or realign. Exactly. You can read 100 books on managing anxiety, right? But until you actually notice the physical feeling of anxiety rising in your chest, catch the thought patterns, and then consciously practice a calming technique in that moment.
The knowledge is just theoretical.
Yeah.
Extract.
True self-knowledge, true self-mastery comes from that direct lived experience, consistent, careful self-observation. Not just knowing about the architecture of wisdom,
but actually living inside it, building it through experience.
Spot on. It's the difference between reading the map and actually walking the streets, learning the city by navigating it yourself.
That's a great link. Okay, so we've built this internal foundation. Now, Tolstoy's reflections also seem to bridge us into this crucial spiritual dimension, especially with that prayer again. Oh Lord, help me to rejoice following and fulfilling your will. This really raises a key question. How does the spiritual angle fit with, or maybe enhance, the very rational, self-control focus of Stoicism we talked about earlier?
Yeah, they seem like different approaches, don't they? One emphasizes willpower, the other dependence on something higher.
Right. How do they work together in this architecture?
What's really insightful, I think, is that Tolstoy's spiritual approach doesn't necessarily contradict the Stoic view. It actually complements it beautifully.
Complements how?
Well, think about it. Epictetus teaches us to use our reason, our discipline, our willpower to resist being enslaved by impulses. And that's powerful. But Tolstoy seems to recognize the inherent limits of relying solely on our own rational minds and individual strength.
Limits? Like what?
Let's be real. There are times in life dealing with profound grief, overwhelming despair, intense external pressures, where our individual psychological resources, our sheer willpower, just feel inadequate.
Yeah, sometimes willpower just isn't enough.
Exactly. There are moments when the internal storm is too big. We need to draw on something beyond ourselves. Tolstoy's prayer suggests that finding that sustained inner stability, that resilience, might require connecting to something larger.
Like a divine will or a sense of purpose or core values.
Precisely. Something transcendent that provides extra strength, perspective, meaning. It's acknowledging that while we have agency, we're also part of a bigger picture.
So it doesn't cancel out personal responsibility.
Not at all. It expands the toolkit. It broadens the sources from which we can draw strength. It acknowledges that sometimes true resilience comes from aligning with purposes larger than our immediate desires, tapping into a deeper wellspring, maybe within a spiritual framework.
So integrating personal responsibility with that kind of spiritual humility.
It offers a more complete, more robust approach to handling our inner lives than relying solely on rationality or solely on faith. It builds a stronger, more resilient internal architecture.
That makes a lot of sense. A powerful combination. Okay, so we've explored the internal foundations, the emotional and spiritual pillars. Now let's pivot outwards to the social world, which is equally crucial, but man, can it be complex.
Understatement of the year.
Right. And here, Robert Greene, in his Daily Laws, offers an insight that might initially sound pretty cynical to some.
I think I know which one you mean.
He says, wise and clever people learn early on that they can display conventional behavior and math conventional ideas without having to believe in them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can rub people the wrong way.
It can. It immediately makes you think, is he just advocating for being dishonest? For being fake? Or is there something more nuanced, maybe strategically wise, happening in our social interactions?
Greene is definitely provocative, but I don't think he's advocating for malicious deceit or just being a hypocrite for the sake of it. It's more about recognizing a fundamental, maybe uncomfortable truth about how society works, how human psychology works.
Okay.
If you connect it back to our theme, you can see this as a kind of sophisticated extension of emotional regulation, but applied outwardly to the social sphere.
How so?
Just like we learn to control our internal impulses for our own long-term good, Greene suggests we sometimes need to consciously adapt our external presentation. What he calls putting on the mask that is most appropriate for the group.
For social harmony.
Yeah.
Or effectiveness.
Both. And maybe even for self-preservation sometimes. It's a form of highly developed social emotional intelligence. The source even says, people will swallow the bait because it flatters them to believe that you share their ideas.
That sounds a bit manipulative, though.
It can sound that way, but think about practical examples. In a work meeting, do you really need to voice every single radical, unconventional thought you have, even if you believe it deeply, if it's going to completely derail the team or alienate everyone?
Probably not if you want to get anything done.
Or at a sensitive family dinner, is it always wise or even kind to express every raw, unfiltered opinion on a touchy subject?
No, that often ends badly.
Right. Greene's point is that wise people understand context and audience. They realize that just blurting out every unfiltered thought isn't always productive. It can harm relationships, hinder your own goals, or just be ineffective.
So it's not about being fake, but about being strategic in how you present yourself.
Exactly. Reserving your deepest or most challenging thoughts for the right moments, the right people. Choosing your battles, essentially.
Okay, I can see the wisdom in that, even if it feels a bit calculated. It shifts the focus from just being honest all the time to being effective and discerning.
Precisely.
So if displaying conventional behavior sometimes is wise, and Greene flat out says complete free expression is a social impossibility.
Which is another blunt statement.
It is. What does that really mean for how we interact? If full transparency isn't always possible or wise, does that mean we can never truly be ourselves? Or that we always have to be guarded and calculating?
Well, Greene connects this directly to that piece of biblical wisdom he quotes. Do not give dogs what is holy, and do not throw your pearls before swine, lest they trample them underfoot and turn to attack you.
Right. The pearls before swine.
Again, it sounds harsh, but the core message isn't about dishonesty. It's about discernment, recognizing that not every audience is ready, willing, or able to receive every truth you possess. and not every truth is appropriate for every single setting.
So wisdom means sometimes holding back or communicating strategically.
Yes. Imagine sharing something deeply personal, a profound vulnerability, or a complex idea, your pearls, with someone who's just going to mock it, dismiss it, or maybe even use it against you.
That would be incredibly painful and pointless.
Exactly. You don't just waste your valuable insider vulnerability, you risk getting hurt, trampled, or attacked. So social wisdom involves reading the room, understanding your audience, assessing the context, and choosing the most effective and sometimes the safest path.
Which might mean not saying certain things or phrasing them differently.
Right. For the greater good of the interaction, or a long-term goal, or even just your own peace of mind. It's about navigating the world effectively while still preserving your core self.
Okay, that's a critical point. But how does this strategic approach square with authenticity? We all strive to be authentic, right? Isn't constantly masking or holding back, sacrificing your genuine self for social convenience? Doesn't that create a crack in the architecture?
I don't think it necessarily contradicts authenticity. It actually reframes it. Yeah. This kind of social wisdom suggests that true authentic living requires understanding when and how to express your deepest values and your true self effectively.
So it's not about being someone you're not.
No, it's about being strategic in your self-expression. Think of it as dynamic, discerning authenticity, not this rigid, I must say everything I think all the time approach.
Okay, discerning authenticity. I like that.
Sometimes the most genuinely authentic action you can take is to temporarily hold back an immediate impulse to speak your mind.
Like when?
Well, if you authentically care about a relationship, maybe you bite your tongue on a petty criticism that would just cause needless hurt. That's an act of love, which is authentic.
Sure.
Or if you're authentically committed to a project goal, maybe you adapt your communication style to persuade different people instead of stubbornly sticking to one way that doesn't work for everyone. That's strategic, but still aligned with your authentic goal.
So the wisdom lies in aligning your actions with your core values and purposes, but doing it effectively in the world.
Exactly. This flexibility and discernment actually enables a more impactful, sustainable authenticity over the long haul. It's not sacrifice, it's conscious choice for greater effect.
Okay, that reframes it completely. Not sacrifice, but strategy. Powerful. All right, let's shift from these, philosophical and social strategies to something very practical. How do we actually build this architecture day to day?
It's a practical integration, yeah.
And the sources offer some great guidance here. There's this fantastic, almost unexpected quote from the legendary weightlifter Tommy Kono.
Ah, yes, the core strength.
Exactly, he observed. Power lies in the hips and the lats. The hips are the core.
Vulgar.
It's such a sharp, practical insight from, an unlikely source for a discussion on wisdom.
But the parallel is perfect, isn't it?
What is the parallel, exactly, between physical power and this mental, emotional core strength we've been circling around?
It's a brilliant analogy because it grounds everything in something tangible. Just like real physical power, peak athletic performance, requires that strong foundation, the core plus technique developed through consistent, hard practice.
You don't just wake up strong.
Exactly. Yeah. Emotional wisdom, spiritual grounding, social intelligence, these are the same. They require fundamental practices, core principles, cultivated over time. They need consistent training.
So emotional regulation, spiritual alignment, social discernment, these are like the core muscles of our inner lives.
That's a great way to think about it. They need to be built and maintained through diligent, ongoing effort. You don't just get wisdom by reading about it. It's an embodied capacity, a skill you develop.
And just like a weak physical core leads to instability and injuries.
A weak emotional or social core leads to poor decisions, instability in life, and limits your ability to truly flourish. It makes wisdom active, something you build, not just something you possess passively.
Okay, so how do we structure that building process to make it actionable? The sources give us the 5 F's of focus.
All right. Fitness, family, friends, finance, fun.
This provides such a clear, practical framework, doesn't it? For organizing where we put our attention and energy across the main areas of life. It makes all the abstract stuff concrete.
It really does. These 5 F's are like the practical workout zones where we can apply and strengthen all those principles we've discussed. They're the different muscle groups we need to train for that overall core strength.
Let's break that down. How does each F connect?
Okay, so fitness. Obviously physical health, which is vital, but it's also about the mental and emotional energy and resilience you need. Back to Kuno's core strength. A healthy body supports a clearer mind. better able to handle emotional storms or resist those unhealthy impulses.
Hard to be emotionally regulated when you're exhausted or feeling unwell.
Exactly. Then family and friends.
Yeah.
These are prime territory for practicing Green's social wisdom, aren't they? Learning how and when to communicate, navigating disagreements, using emotional regulation, applying discernment.
Building authentic relationships takes work. Honesty, yes, but also wisdom.
And it's where Tolstoy's spiritual alignment through connection and service can really come into play too. Then finance. This demands huge amounts of emotional regulation, right?
Oh, yeah. Patience, delayed gratification.
Resisting impulse buys, managing anxiety about money, avoiding that relentless pursuit of wealth that can disconnect you. It directly echoes Epictetus on not being enslaved by desires. Managing money wisely is a real act of self-mastery.
And finally, fun. Seems simple, but there's wisdom here too.
Absolutely. It's about discerning between genuine recreation that actually restores and revitalizes you versus mere escapism or those unchecked pleasures that ultimately deplete you or lead you astray.
Finding joy that aligns with deeper purpose, maybe, like Tolstoy suggested, not just chasing fleeting highs.
Precisely. It ties right back to Epictetus again, enjoying pleasure without being enslaved by it. This whole framework shows that wisdom isn't some lofty ideal for monks on mountaintops.
No, it's built in the everyday.
Right? In how we manage our health, our relationships, our money, even our leisure time. It demands integration across all these areas. It's a blueprint for a whole, well-lived life.
And underpinning all of this practical application, really the entire architecture, is this recurring theme. Consistency, the power of just showing up day after day.
The unsung hero.
Totally. R. Collier says it so simply. Success is the sum of small efforts, repeated day in and day out. It just reinforces that wisdom isn't built by lightning bolts of insight.
No grand gestures needed.
It's the diligent, almost invisible daily practices. The quiet moments of reflection, the consistent effort to pause before reacting, the regular check-in with your values. Small things, done repeatedly.
This is absolutely where the real work happens. And Shinichi Suzuki, the music teacher, nails it with that famous line, practice on the days that you eat.
Aha! Meaning practice every single day. Non-negotiable.
Exactly. It perfectly captures the role of disciplined consistency in mastering anything, music, weightlifting, or the profound art of navigating life wisely.
So cultivating wisdom needs to be a daily habit, not just something you think about when things go wrong.
Precisely. Make it non-negotiable. If you're consistently making those small efforts, reflecting, practicing emotional control, choosing discernment, aligning with purpose, even tiny improvements add up, you start counteracting that idea that time will magnify all your deficiencies.
Instead, time magnifies your efforts.
Exactly. Time becomes your ally, building your capacities, strengthening that whole architecture of wisdom, piece by consistent piece, across all those 5 Fs.
Okay, so when we pull back and look at all these different threads, the Stoics, Franklin, Tolstoy, Green, Kono, the Proverbs, the practical advice, it really does form a coherent pattern, doesn't it?
It really does. It hangs together remarkably well.
What's so fascinating is how each piece, even though they come from different times and perspectives, tackles a different angle of the same core challenge. How do you maintain your inner integrity, your authentic self, while still dealing effectively with all the external pressures and internal ups and downs?
It's not just a random collection. It's genuinely an architecture.
Yeah, a cohesive framework for living a full, meaningful life.
Absolutely. And the essay we drew from does a great job synthesizing this, pointing out those 4 key interconnected dimensions that run through all these sources. They form the core pillars.
Remind us of those 4 again.
Yeah, sure. First, the emotional dimension. That's about the self-awareness, to know when intense feelings are clouding your judgment. Franklin's anger, Epictetus's pleasures, Tolstoy's drunkenness, and having the discipline to pause, to not make big moves in that state.
Got it. Emotional self-awareness and regulation.
Second, the spiritual dimension.
Yeah.
This involves both taking that Tolstoyan responsibility for your inner state, seeing unhappiness as a potential signal, and being open to strength and wisdom beyond yourself, like in his prayer. It's about purpose, alignment, maybe humility.
A responsibility plus openness.
Third, the social dimension. That's the intelligence to adapt how you communicate and act in different social settings, like Green advises, without losing your core values. Discerning when to speak, when to listen, when to adapt. Pearls before swines, essentially.
Strategic, discerning interaction.
And fourth, the practical dimension. This is where it all hits the ground. Translating insights into daily habits. Kono's core strength, the 5 Fs, Collier's, and Suzuki's emphasis on relentless consistency, making it real,
building the capacity through daily practice.
Exactly. And the key is they're all interwoven. It's like physical fitness, you need cardio, strength, flexibility. Wisdom needs consistent exercise across all these areas: emotional, spiritual, social, practical. Not just random bursts. They build on each other to create that strong, resilient framework for life.
It's really powerful when you see it laid out like that. This whole deep dive just reminds you that while the world changes dramatically, ancient Greece versus today's crazy information age,
The fundamental human challenges remain remarkably similar.
they really do. Maintaining your agency, finding emotional balance, building good relationships. These struggles are timeless. The wisdom we've unpacked here feels just as relevant now as when it was first written down.
It truly is timeless. And notice, this wisdom doesn't give you simple, easy answers, does it? No step-by-step manual.
No, definitely not.
It offers a framework for thinking about these complex challenges, which raises another interesting point. If you have these different dimensions, emotional, spiritual, social, practical, how do you know which one to lean on in a specific situation?
Oh, good question.
This suggests that maybe the highest form of wisdom isn't just knowing these different approaches, but knowing when each one is most helpful. The essay calls this meta-wisdom.
Meta-wisdom, like wisdom about wisdom.
Exactly. The ability to recognize which tool fits the current job. Are you caught in negative thinking? Maybe start with Tolstoy's drunk analogy, pause action. If that's not enough, maybe lean into the spiritual dimension, seek alignment or purpose. Dealing with a tricky social situation, maybe Green's discernment is key.
So it's about flexibility, knowing which perspective to apply.
Right. Building an intuitive sense of your own architecture and knowing which pillar needs attention or which tool is right for the moment. It's not rigid adherence. It's skillful application.
That's incredibly helpful. Meta-wisdom. And maybe the biggest takeaway from all of this is that wisdom isn't some fixed state you arrive at.
Definitely not a destination.
It's a practice. Ongoing, dynamic. Just like Tommy Kono knew physical power needs daily training, all these thinkers understood that living wisely requires that consistent daily attention to emotional regulation, spiritual alignment, social intelligence, practical effort.
It's a continuous journey of building, refining, strengthening that inner structure.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening.
Yeah.
As you go back into your own complex world, maybe consider which of these architectural dimensions, the emotional, the spiritual, the social, or the practical, feels like the biggest challenge for you right now.
That's a great question to reflect on.
And following from that, what one small, consistent daily practice, inspired by something we talked about today, could you start integrating to begin strengthening that specific part of your personal architecture of wisdom, starting maybe tomorrow?
How will you practice on the days that you eat?
Exactly. How will you build your core? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of wisdom. Keep exploring these ideas, keep questioning, and keep building that inner strength, one thoughtful practice at a time. Until next time.